Hey everybody, my name is Kerry Ritter. Welcome to another episode of Typecasts. So, I don't know if you remember in 2010 or so, but JavaScript fatigue was real. We had Angular, we had Knockout, we had Backbone, we had React, and all this stuff kind of happening at once. And I thought it was awesome because there was so much to learn. Other people not having so much fun trying to keep up with everything. And that's completely fair because it was kind of exhausting. But I don't know if we just got better at this over the last few years. I don't know if we've just kind of settled down or we're better at filtering out the noise, but it doesn't seem so exhausting anymore. But still, we're seeing huge strides in improvements in technologies in the web space. So today we're gonna go over 5 technologies that I think you should keep an eye out for in 2021. So the first item on my list is Stencil.js, because I think that building web components in 2021 is going to be the way to go. I think we're going to see that growing in popularity versus building your components for React or building it specifically for Angular or building it specifically for Vue. And in my opinion, using Stencil.js is probably the best toolkit out there for building your native web components. So I talk about this at length in a previous video, but if you're not familiar with what native web components are, imagine building a React component or an Angular component, but you have full browser native support. So you're not actually pulling in full frameworks or full libraries. It's built into the actual browser support itself. So you're building reusable declarative componentry using HTML, using JavaScript, and you can ship it immediately. So Stencil.js has a ton of features that makes it stand out from competitors and from writing your own native web components without the use of a framework. So some of the big ones to me, reactive datum binding. So whenever you mutate a state object value, it's going to automatically update your template. Your templates are written in JSX, which is great. We have out-of-the-box TypeScript support with no effort. And then you still have async rendering, your static site generation, and your virtual DOM, all very useful functionality. But one of the biggest things to me is the whole output target design. So you're writing your web components using TypeScript, using JSX and all that, but then you actually output that to whether it's a native web component format, whether it's a website format that's statically generated, or you can use the stencil output targets for Angular, React, Ember, Vue, and actually have one in beta for Svelte. So in your stencil config, all you need to do is add that new output target and define your setup for each one of these frameworks. So now not only do you have native web component functionality, but you actually have that wrapped for whatever framework you like to develop in. So super useful from a lifespan perspective because this is going to last much longer and grow as the ecosystem of JavaScript frameworks expands. And then you still get to use all the awesome functionality from whatever framework you like. So in December, Wix Engineering actually released a blog post called "Is Stencil a Better React?" And I thought that was really interesting because as I got deep into Stencil, that's exactly how it felt. It was like everything I liked about React, plus a lot of things I liked about Angular, and then plus a lot of things that were unique to Stencil itself. So if you read through this blog post, and I'll link it in the description, they'll talk a lot about what makes them similar, what makes them different. And then interestingly, they actually have a side-by-side comparison of what they had as a React component and what they had as a Stencil component and how those two things changed. And it's a really interesting article. Highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in Stencil.js. So next is Tailwind CSS. And Tailwind is a CSS framework. I like to call it a design system toolkit, but basically it gives you all the tools you need to build your own CSS framework or to build your own design system. So it's sort of a competitor to Bootstrap or Foundation, but it takes a really different approach in how it actually does the CSS styling. So we're gonna go over how to actually use Tailwind, how I've used it, and what makes this different from using something like Bootstrap. So when I first saw Tailwind, honestly, I hated it because look at all these classes you have to use to actually make something usable. I think this is exhausting. Some of these examples here, like this one, this is just a card. All these classes you need to actually make that work was a bit over encumbering. So this is how I've been using Tailwind. And I know it doesn't look great because of all the IntelliSense errors, but it's still not that hard to write. It's really not that hard to parse. What I really do is use this apply mixin, and that allows me to take the Tailwind classes like font bold, like P2, rounded, etc., and actually apply them to my custom classes. So I have a button class. It's rounded, it has a shadow, transition. I'm using all Tailwind utilities for that. And then I have a hover state, which increases the shadow. And then I have these things like BG Nook Color Primary. So I have my own color palette here. And to use these colors, it is very straightforward, and I really like that. So if I come to Tailwind JSX or Tailwind JS, I'm actually using CSS variables here, and I'm applying those to my post CSS configuration. And now when a consumer wants to modify this theme, they can just use CSS variables, and the rest of these classes are automatically going to work with those variables. So it creates a very strong, flexible design system. I think it does a great job of giving you all the tools you need to build your own design system. So interestingly enough, if you follow Ionic, CEO Max Lynch was actually tweeting about his use of Tailwind, kind of talking about how they could use that in Ionic. So as an example of what you can do with Tailwind, you could literally use that as the foundation to build something like Ionic. And that's exactly what he did. He actually did not the entirety of Ionic, but he made a small little prototype. If you're wondering what you can use Tailwind for, I think this is a great example of it. If you're going to be doing something like an MVP or a prototype, I would still probably use a bootstrap or a foundation. But if you're really familiar with Tailwind, maybe this is a great choice for that as well. So number 3 might be a little bit weird, but it is the language Rust. It is a low-level language that focuses on performance and memory efficiency. So you might be wondering what this has to do with building web technologies or building front-end technologies. So as you may know, WebAssembly is coming. If you're not familiar with WebAssembly, it is essentially the ability to run binary compiled code on a client machine. So running that in the browser instead of running server-side code. So one quick example of what WebAssembly can do, this is a project from Lenny Keene, co-founder of Loudchorus, along with myself. He's using FFmpeg, which is a library that allows you to convert, stream, or record video or audio. And typically this is purely a server-side framework or server-side library, but with WebAssembly, it's actually packaged and delivered as a client library. So in this example, what we're doing is we're taking an uploaded file, we're actually converting it from what would be a uncompressed WAV or MP3 and compressing that to an MP3. So we're going from 20 megs as a full file down to like 3 megs as a compressed file, and then we send that compressed file to the server. That's just an example of what you can do with WebAssembly. Taking some stuff that would typically run on the server and run it on the client machine. So it's not detrimental to them because it just runs in their browser. They don't need to download any plugins. And it saves you a ton of bandwidth and it's a ton of actual processing power. So what does this have to do with Rust? Rust, like I said, is focused on performance and memory efficiency. There is no garbage collector, there is no package runtime. So really your code is going to scale as you use and pull in features. So your library can be as small as it needs to be and only grows to as big as it has to be. So we're shipping as small of binaries as possible, which is ideal, and we're doing it in the most efficient way we probably can. So along with this, there's also a strong package management in Cargo, and there's actually a community already rallying around using Rust as the kind of go-to language for WebAssembly. So while there's tons of options out there, Rust is really starting to set itself apart as the de facto standard of WebAssembly. So number 4 is Nest, and I've talked about Nest a lot. If you're unfamiliar, it is a TypeScript-focused, modern, progressive web application framework, meaning you get really good application design out of the box, you get modern tooling already available to you through the default template, and you get a ton of great community support from Nest and from the open source community. So Nest is on this list because I think it's going to get even bigger in 2021. It was the fastest rising JavaScript framework of 2020. In 2020, we saw a lot of people from the Angular world really adopt and embrace Nest. I think in 2021, we're going to see that expand to the React and the Vue communities. So I think we're also going to see it expand in the enterprise world because it looks very familiar to a Java or to a .NET developer, but uniquely to the Nest, TypeScript, NPM world, you now have one language where you can write your front-end code and your back-end code, and it's actually a really great developer experience. In addition to that, Nest is significantly better at working in a serverless paradigm than Java or .NET. So as serverless grows, which I expect it to do in 2021, I think that'll really help Nest grow even more because it's going to be a much better option as you start deploying serverless APIs and functions. So shameless plug, I will be releasing a free ebook with ultimatecourses.com this week. So go check that out later this week. Subscribe to my channel if you want to get an update on when that's coming out. And we'll also be releasing some NestJS courses as well. So bookmark ultimatecourses.com, subscribe to the channel for more information later. So the last item on my list is Dino, not Deno, Dino. It is a new secure runtime for JavaScript and TypeScript. It is an alternative to Node. Fun fact, built in Rust. So the creator of Node, Ryan Dahl, actually talked in 2018. I think it was called something like the 10 things I regret about Node. He outlined some of the things about Node that he feels like he did wrong from a design standpoint, and some things that are not ideal about the Node ecosystem in general. So he built Dino as a way to solve the problems, because there's no real going back on a lot of those decisions that were made at the beginning of Node, because there's so much built around it. I think Dino is going to be a really interesting opportunity because it has a ton of security just built in out of the box. The TypeScript out of the box is very useful. Shipping a single executable. I think Dino is going to be a very interesting place to look once the community starts getting there, and it's already on its way. So we're already seeing some frameworks really start to take hold and really get some sort of community backing. I think once we start seeing some parity between what is available in the Node ecosystem and what is available in the Dino ecosystem, Dino is going to start becoming a really serious competitor. So if you haven't heard of or you haven't used Dino before, it's really not that hard to get started. Check out the manual. They have a quick start on here on how to install and get ready. Definitely something to keep your eye out on, because I really think it's going to grow in 2021, especially as the community starts to latch on. So some honorable mentions for things that I think you should watch out for in 2021. Ionic Framework is a big one. It is a really good cross-platform mobile web development toolkit. So as you're building hybrid mobile apps or you're building progressive web apps, this is going to be what you want to use. It has such a strong community. Capacitor, which is the spiritual successor to Cordova. It offers the native functionality wrapping for iOS, for Android, but also for the web. So it makes it really easy to use browser native tooling and also make it available on your native mobile devices. Then Svelte, which is a new front-end framework which has some really novel takes on how to do your components. With Angular, React, and Vue already really being strong in the front-end framework communities, it's going to be hard to see them push through, but it's something to keep your eye out on because I hear it and I see it a lot. And then lastly, there's a new library called jQuery. I am totally kidding. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.